One key thing I think that is part of the legacy of the Lord of the Rings is the comments on industrialization and basically things that, like in the books, the Scouring of the Shire. I think that there's a relatively explicit moral lesson in there, isn't there, about how these things will chew up everything that is good. And there's a comment on the website here saying that from Justin B saying that Mordor's actually barren due to pollution. I don't know whether that's serious or not, but I can believe it. It would make sense. Yeah, they're very industrial.
You've got the Sea of Nirn, and Sauron's got a whole sort of like slave, army around the Sea of Nirn, which is like the only place they can draw resources from because it's the only place in Mordor that has water.
So I think that that's one of the things that is going to become very salient because, of course, in the modern day, we face, us concreting over our countryside and losing our parochial way of life, our hobbit way of life, if you will. It seems to me to be a warning that if you allow the forces of industrialization to conquer what is quaint and is English ultimately in Hobbiton and, the land of the hobbits, then you destroy a little bit of them as well, and it will never be the same again. You can't reclaim it because then it will be artificial. And that seems to me to be one of the most pertinent lessons in our time that you can take from the Lord of the Rings, because this assault on our nation and our way of life does exist.
So I've written a bit about this before. First thing to note is I was always amused by the fact that Tolkien, when the motorbike became popularized, he started calling them orc machines. Which just goes to tell you exactly what he thought about innovation. But there's a town in the Cotswolds called Stow-on-the-Wold, and there's this church there called St. Edward's, and it's dedicated to Edward the Confessor, obviously the last Anglo-Saxon king before the Norman conquest. So it's deeply entrenched into English mythology. And it was also the site of the final battle in the First English Civil War. But the reason I bring it up is because around its doors, there are these two massive trees. And Tolkien used to visit there and go to the pub there quite frequently. And it's said that this church itself inspired the doors of Durin in the Fellowship of the Ring. And I mention it because I had family members who visited it recently, and they went inside and they saw that the clock that has been maintained by the same family for over 110 years has now been automated. And I just think this is sort of generally instructive to the fact that we've got these long-standing establishments of English tradition which have influenced our mythology and our history and hold a special place in our mind. And now automation and the outsourcing to efficiency and precision under the guise of wanting to be correct, but this sort of slow creep of mechanization is exactly what Tolkien was warning about, and I think that's what's sending our mythology into retreat. I just think that's an interesting thing.
And there was also the issue of nature's revenge with the Ents.
Mm-hmm. I was going to touch on that because I think what Tolkien, if I am to read it as allegorical at all, I would imagine that Tolkien was trying to assert that nature will have its way with you eventually. If you try and resist nature, that it will eventually remind you of the nature of reality in a quite violent way. That could just be me reading too much into it, but I think it's not too inexplicit.
Definitely. One interesting thing actually that I would mention, forgive me, it's a bit of a non sequitur, but about the Ents. When they attack Isengard was, from Tolkien's point of view, the Ents and the little Entmoot and everything where they have a big gathering, in the language of the Ents, you can't say a word without explaining the entire history of that word, right? And so that's why it takes Ents so long to say everything. And Tolkien was having a bit of a satirical joke here.
Wait, so they're German?
Pardon?
So they're German?
It's because they're Oxford Dons. Was what he was going with. He was like, they sit around, just cross every T, dot every I, and just talk and talk and talk. But also, when the Ents do finally march on Isengard, for Tolkien, that was him fixing something from Shakespeare's Macbeth, where it's prophesied that Macbeth would finally be defeated when Birnam Wood came to Dunsandane. And it's like, oh, right. And Tolkien was like, right, so the forest is literally going to move and destroy Macbeth the usurper. And obviously gets there. And, Macduff's army just use the trees as camouflage. And Tolkien's like, no, I'm actually going to make the forest move and, go in for the kill. And so I just think that it's a great bit of trivia.
That is really good. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I also think it's one of the most, at least in the films, one of the most compelling parts of the films is when the trees march on Isengard. That's just like, wow, this is great.
Because you've never seen it anywhere else.
No,
Like,
exactly.
It's not in any other story. It's incredible.
So, what other things were particularly salient with people here that you took away from it?
I think the ring has to do with greed. It's to do about greed. Yeah. Now, obviously, I realize I said nothing controversial or weird, but I think that this is a good thing to take. Is that sometimes greed is destructive.
That's probably the least profound philosophical thing I've ever heard you say, Stelios. Doctor in
How many years
philosophy.
at York was it, Stelios?
No, I wanted to talk about this a bit more.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
Actually, I won't because I realized that. No,
Enlighten us with more wisdom.
Can I rescue Stelios by posing a question? Upon reflection, what are our thoughts about how loyal the adaptation of the Peter Jackson films are to the books? And I say this because I absolutely love them, especially the extended editions, but they do clearly have some interjections that Tolkien, had he watched them, probably would have got his back up at. And I'm thinking, in particular, Éowyn's girl boss moment, which is the most egregious part of all of the films, where she stabs the Witch King in the face, like that. Like there's some moments in there which are amazing, like the March of the Ents, but then I don't know. Some of the jokes feel almost borderline Marvel these days.
They miss out my favorite part of Éowyn's story from the books as well, which is where after she has defeated the Witch King, she immediately gets together with Faramir and accepts her rightful place as a housewife.
They put that in the extended cut.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's in the
She
extended edition.
gives a bit of a speech, if I remember correctly, as well, saying that finally she's going to basically know her place.
okay.
Foot Patrol Harry here.
I think that whole section, unironically, is some of Tolkien's best writing in the entire trilogy.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful, isn't it?
But I think a large part of that comes from exactly what you say, Connor, because really they change Éowyn's character motivation for why she wants to fight, right? In the films, yeah, it's very much she's held back by the patriarchal system and, women have every right, to fight as men and all of that. But really in the books, Éowyn's desire to fight comes from a place of enormous despair, and she can't see a future. She can't see hope on the horizon. And so she feels that dying on the battlefield is probably the most noble way that she could go out. So really she's trying to fight because she wants to die. And in meeting Faramir towards the end of the novel, all of a sudden, because of Faramir's wonderful nature as a human being, even though as far the whole Aragorn and Gandalf, the rest of the army, they've gone to the Black Gate. For all Éowyn and Faramir know, waiting upon the precipice, it's about to be the end of days. And yet still in that moment, no matter how long it's going to be, Éowyn, it says, and then the heart of Éowyn changed, right? It goes from cold, and all of a sudden there's that thing of, it doesn't matter if it's 2 days, I have some sort of future with Faramir. There's some sort of hope here still, that if I stay with this man. And it's such a beautifully well-written bit of prose that, Tolkien pulls off. And I agree, Connor, it's a real shame that was lost in translation.
Okay, I have another figure I want us to discuss because I think he's a very important figure in the books, Grimmer Wormtongue.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because, what is interesting is that he's not exactly a sophist. I don't know if he told Denethor, not Denethor, Theoden, yeah, exactly what he wanted to hear. But he was sort of a doomer. He was telling him essentially, there is nothing you can do but submit to Sauron.
Yeah.
Wasn't this the gist?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he wouldn't let Theoden recognize his own strength.
Yeah.
And so in poisoning Theoden's mind into thinking that he's capable of less than he actually is. Yeah, he brings.
So in this,
it's very complex manipulation because it's not just being a flatterer.
Mm.
It wasn't exactly the average flatterer. He was actually being really harmful.
Yeah.
So to build an analogy, which is not meant to insult anyone or be taken as a dig at anyone. So in this is evil in the personification of evil, Tony Blair, and Grimwar Wormtongue is a certain Persian rug merchant.
What? What on earth are you on about?
I don't know if I see it, but maybe with a bit more explanation.
Submit to Blair. That's what he's
Exactly.
saying.
Right.
There you go. That's
Yeah,
what I'm saying. There's a certain submit to Blair.
Right, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any comments, Stelios? Have you seen?
We have several comments. So, Justin B. Mordor is actually barren due to pollution. The orcs.
That's one I've read already.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm a bit zoned out.
So. Sorry, Stelios. I shouldn't have shared those brownies
Okay.
with you. But
we have
been at the pipe weed for too long, people.
No, I've never tried anything. Yeah. So Gandalf the Gay. I went to the grave of Tolkien and his wife just outside of Oxford some months ago. The grave itself uses the nicknames Beren for John and Luthien for Edith. This directly references one of the earliest tales of Middle-earth about a man called Beren who came back from the dead, fell in love with an elf called Luthien, an ancestor of the Númenórean kings.
I knew that one, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Luke,
go ahead.
am I right in thinking, because I know they reference it in one of the extended edition scenes, that Jackson drew from the Beren and Luthien book to flesh out Aragorn's relationship with Arwen a bit more, because otherwise it was quite difficult to translate on film.
The song that he sings about Arwen comes directly from that, isn't it? Is that
It
is
might
that right?
well do.
Yeah,
it might well do. I think it's like in the appendices or something. There's a whole Tolkien talks about the romance between Aragorn and Arwen, which again certainly harkens back to medieval European literature. Right, it's very Arthurian that the man will go on this great quest, and when he's come back and achieved victory, he'll marry. And achieve love, and so I don't know, the Beren and Luthien story is really, really good though, really good. Yeah, one that people should read.
We have another comment here from Texas Gal. The eye of Josh is ever watchful. Did you read that as well?
I didn't know, but I am ever watchful. And
Right.
just as evil as Sauron.
Okay, Captain Charlie the Beagle. I think these Tolkien academics trying to shoehorn modern politics into Lord of the Rings is symptomatic of the larger issue, which is that academia forces people to come up with the most clickbait perspectives in order to get attention and citations. This is actually very true.
Yeah, there might be something interesting to say about that point actually, which is just to draw on the whole thing that constantly gets referenced of Tolkien hating allegory. Right, which is true. He obviously wasn't a fan of allegory, but I think it's the reason why is really important to the success of The Lord of the Rings itself, right? Because although, yes, the Dead Marshes are very much draw upon Tolkien's experience fighting in the Somme and all those sorts of things, and so but it's allegory versus applicability, right? So lots of things can be applicable to it. For example, the Beren and Luthien thing is really it's applicable and inspired by the ancient Greek tale of Orpheus, right, going down into the underworld and all those sorts of things. So there are constant. I could spend hours just talking about all the references to old European folklore that Tolkien draws into creating his world, whilst creating something wonderfully original in its own terms.
Can you explain a bit more the idea that Tolkien hated allegory? What do you mean by that? Because it seems to me that a lot of the lore has powerful.
He just didn't want people essentially saying that the whole War of the Ring is essentially just an allegory for World War II, right? Okay. Or it's all just an allegory for fascism. Because if you say that, you narrow it. because then it's like, one of the most famous allegories, right? Animal Farm and George Orwell. Once you say, well, Animal Farm's an allegory for Stalinism, then it's only about that thing. Whereas with Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings, it can be about so many things from centuries and centuries of history and not be tied down.
So you mean that he wanted just to express a whole range of themes from the human condition rather than a particular event?
Yes.
He explicitly said so as well. So Justin B says, there are so many changes to the story in the Jackson films that I can't watch them anymore. Too many pointless additions, too many critical things cut, and the Hobbit films were even worse. The first remains the only film that I almost walked out of the cinema, and I never watched the other two despite how much I love The Lord of the Rings. Now, I share a similar amount of sourness for the Hobbit films, but allow me to be everyone's salvation here. There is a Hobbit film abridged, whereby they cut out all the stuff that's not in the books, and it actually becomes quite a good film. And I really enjoyed watching it. It exists online. I've been trying to find it. I wasn't able to find a version of it. And I really want to find a version of it in 1080p if I can, so I can watch it in nice high quality. It's like 3 hours and 40 minutes long, but it is really, really good.
When you say it cuts out everything from the books, you mean it just cuts out women?
Yes.
Yes.
As in, it's only the stuff in the books.
Right, okay.
All of the additional nonsense.
So you miss out on that rubbish elf dwarf romance that's thrown in there?
Yeah, the interracial romance that got put in there. Gone.
The weird hypercompression of the plot of the Silmarillion, where the wizards go and defeat magic ghost Sauron, and also intercut with Stephen Fry making painfully unfunny jokes.
Did they cut out most of the Battle of the Five Armies as well? Because I remember they made an entire film out of that one battle, and the battle itself is like 2.5 hours in the film. In the book, it's half a paragraph.
It's okay though. I love battles.
It wasn't good.
It was a terrible battle.
The problem with the Hobbit,
really terrible battle.
The problem with the Hobbit as well is it's like pulled between 5 different studios at the same time, and they kept going back and revising different things, and then they tried to do all of these weird filming techniques. I had to go and I went to see the first one twice.
Oh, do you remember that? What was it? That 42 frames per second, which and also like some 3D, and all of the cinemas that were showing it weren't bright enough, so everybody was just watching dark, fast-paced images, making them feel sick in a dark cinema.
That's why I went and watched it twice, is because the first one I had to walk out midway through and sit in the toilet because I nearly threw up because my eyes were just not adjusted to the 3D and weird pacing. And then the most egregious part is that during loads of the sequences, I remember the first bit where they're chased up a tree by this weird white orc they stick in there for no reason. They repurpose music where it's not meant to go. They just use the Ringwraith theme for no reason throughout the films, even though the Ringwraiths haven't shown up. It was clearly just a hatchet job of like, remember this? Don't you like this? Pay attention to the fact that it's not crap.
Clearly it was that they had, the Ringwraith theme is great. It's a really compelling piece of music, but it's a theme for a particular character, and they couldn't figure out how to write more compelling themes for characters.
I'm pretty sure Howard Shore is still alive as well, and so he could have just wrote more music.
Did Howard Shore do the score for the Hobbit films, or did they move over to somebody else?
I thought it was Howard Shore, but
so did I.
But I mean, anything he does, he will always be the composer of the music for the Lord of the Rings, which is just epic. You can't top this.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.